Have you ever wondered how many Mevo cameras you can wirelessly connect at the same time? Or which mobile device to use, or does it even matter? Is the Wi-Fi network more important? Because we got the answers and they are pretty interesting. Just in case you don't know what Mevo cameras are, let's go through a quick explanation. Mevo cameras are small cameras designed for live streaming. They work with iOS or Android. They're able to use an existing Wi-Fi network, or you can use your mobile phone's cellular data as well. Now, once you have your cameras connected to the app, you can start a live stream to your favorite destinations, such as YouTube, Facebook, Vimeo, essentially any live streaming destination that supports RTMP. Now, these Mevo cameras have become very popular in a variety of applications. A couple of the most popular applications include houses of worship, live streaming of sports, especially baseball, and even cooking shows. So there's two apps that you can use on your mobile phone that can control Mevo cameras. One of them is just simply the Mevo app, and it is a single camera app. It can control one of these. The other app is called the Mevo Multicam app, and it can control several of these at once. And of course, I'm most interested in the Multicam app because that's what this video is about. We want to see how many cameras we can connect to a mobile device at one time. The way the testing worked was like this. First thing we did is decided what kind of network we're going to use. We use 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi, we use 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, and then we use the hotspot on the Mevo camera itself. Once we were connected to the network, what we did is started adding cameras one at a time and monitored the performance. Checked to see if it was lagging, choppy, checking to see if it gave messages about slow Wi-Fi, etc. And then we kept adding one more camera at a time. And then if it was still usable, we added another camera. We continued that process up to as many as 13 cameras, because that's how many cameras I had available to me. Now let's take a look at the testing parameters. First thing we'll look at is the devices used. I had available to me an iPhone 14 Pro Max, an iPhone XS Max, an iPad Pro 1st Gen from 2015, and a Galaxy Tab S8. So the next thing we look at here is the Wi-Fi setup. So for the test cases that use an existing Wi-Fi, this was the setup. I had an Ubiquiti U6 Pro access point, an Ubiquiti EdgeMax router, and it should be noted that the network was isolated and the only devices on the network were the devices being tested. No other machines or phones were on that network. The clearest available RF channels were used as well. That means you can scan the airwaves and see what kind of other RF traffic is going on. Any Wi-Fi networks in the area are going to interfere a little bit and essentially cause the Wi-Fi performance to degrade. So what you can do is essentially just scan the airwaves and see which Wi-Fi channel has the least amount of traffic on it, and then select that channel for the Wi-Fi network. And then finally, we look at some of the testing tools. First thing I used is InSSIder. It's a software package that lets you scan networks. I also used Wireshark and AirPCAP. An AirPCAP is a Wi-Fi adapter that lets you sniff the network. I use some Ubiquiti network utilization tools, and I use some ceiling fans. And the reason I use ceiling fans is to be able to determine if the screens in the Mevo app are freezing at all. So it's very hard to tell if a camera is freezing unless there's some sort of movement. So all of the cameras and all of the shots that you're going to see in this video are of ceiling fans turning. So don't get dizzy. Next, we look at the app settings that were used in the testing. I kept the camera input quality high. I pretty much always want the highest quality picture that I can get. And then the video source latency I kept to high latency, and that just means that there's a small delay before the video is actually shown on your phone. The reason I use high latency, in the real world, the network speed is not a constant rate, and all packet-based networks have these bandwidth modulations. So your Wi-Fi, 4G, 5G, LTE cellular data, even your hardwired network connection is going to have some bandwidth fluctuations. So with high latency, the device actually stores a little bit of video data before it displays it. So if there's ever a period of time when the network is slow, it starts using the data that it has stored. When the network speed resumes, it can begin storing data again. Here we start looking at the results. The first phone tested was the iPhone 14 on the 5 gigahertz network. This was easily able to have 10 cameras connected simultaneously. You do get a warning once you start adding cameras past the third one. So for cameras 4 through 10, you do get the warning as shown here. So it will let you add more than 3 cameras, but it just gives you a disclaimer stating that the device and your network infrastructure has to be able to support it. So here's a view of some of my raw results. If you have any questions about any of these details, you can leave them in the comments. I don't want to overburden everybody with technical details, but one of the interesting things is how much network bandwidth each camera uses in each scenario. You can see here with one camera connected, it uses 5.38 megabits per second. And as long as the Wi-Fi network can support the bandwidth, this number should generally remain constant no matter how many cameras you have connected. I was able to measure this using some network utilization tools as discussed earlier. So the bottom line is that the iPhone 14 Pro Max is easily able to support 10 cameras on a solid 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi network. Next we look at the Android S8 Galaxy tab. And this had pretty much similar results as the iPhone, so no problems when we were on the 5 gigahertz isolated network. It could easily support 10 cameras. Now for the slightly older iPhone XS Max on the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, it had the same results, no problems connecting 10 cameras. And surprisingly, the iPad Pro 1st Gen could also connect 10 cameras simultaneously. Now the biggest change in results came whenever we changed the network. We're going to look at the 2.4 gigahertz test next. You can see from the results I was only able to get 3 cameras connected with marginal performance. One camera connected was smooth. However, when I added the second one, it became very choppy, and I counted how many glitches I got per 2 minutes and how many slow Wi-Fi warnings I got. Furthermore, you can see that with one camera connected, it used 5.38 megabits. Now, look at the row whenever we have 2 cameras connected. You can see that when we have 2 cameras connected, the first camera's utilization now jumps up to 6.7 megabits per second, and the second camera uses 6.9. And the obvious question is, why would it do that? So let's look at some questions and observations so far. Why does the megabits per second per camera get worse? And 2, all devices had poor results on 2.4 gigahertz. And 3, the quality of the local network is more important than the mobile device. And number 4 is just a note. We're just testing the local area performance. We're not streaming up to the internet yet. You have to get the feed from each camera into the phone first, and then you can stream to the internet. So let's look at some more of these results now. So here's a little bit of the Android tablet struggling on the 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi network. You can see some blocking happening there. So far, it's pretty clear that the 2.4 gigahertz network that I set up was not good for the Mevo system. And we'll talk about that at the end of the video. Next, we'll look at the results when we use the Mevo camera as our Wi-Fi access point. So for this testing, I utilized the Mevo app, so just the Mevo single camera app. That app lets you go in and configure the Wi-Fi parameters on the Mevo camera that's going to act as the access point. I chose to configure a 5 gigahertz network since our previous results showed that it was better. And then we just continue to add one camera at a time. So here are the results when we use the Mevo camera as the access point. We were able to get 5 cameras connected at once, and then when you add the 6th camera, it becomes choppy and unusable. So let's look at the summary so far. 5 GHz outperformed 2.4 GHz. A dedicated Wi-Fi network is better than the Mevo Hotspot. And we saw that some older devices can work, namely the iPad Pro Gen 1. However, you need to take these results with a grain of salt. Every situation is different, and we're going to talk about the intricate details of Wi-Fi networks in the next section. So let's look at what makes 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz different. First of all, 2.4 GHz is able to penetrate well through objects like walls and trees and ceilings. 5 GHz cannot penetrate through objects as well. And since 2.4 GHz has a lower frequency, it's able to have a longer range and it's less susceptible to interference as compared to 5 GHz. Now, the biggest factor that affected these tests was the channel bandwidth. 2.4 GHz has either 20 or 40 megahertz bandwidth. Now on the other hand, 5 GHz can be configured to have either 20, 40, 80, or 160 megahertz bandwidth. Wider channels mean that there'll be more Wi-Fi network capacity. My 5 GHz network was configured to 40 megahertz for this testing. So I had double the bandwidth available. The 2.4 GHz channels around my location are a bit congested. So right now you're probably thinking, aha, I know how to do this. But once again, there are some caveats to having wide channels. There is a limited amount of 160 megahertz channels available, and therefore that means you'll have some channel overlap. So wider channels mean that you can have more interference. Additionally, not every device out there supports 160 megahertz. I don't know if Mevo cameras do. If you want me to test it, leave a comment and maybe I'll post another video about that. And then finally, 160 megahertz is usually overkill. It's pretty rare that a single device on a network needs that much bandwidth by itself. So typically 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi networks utilize many channels with smaller bandwidths in each channel. Alright, so let's wrap this up with some final thoughts here. First of all, the quality of the network is very important. My testing showed that the quality of the network has more impact on the performance than the mobile device itself. If possible, always try to use a dedicated wireless network. If you're using a 2.4 gigahertz network with narrow channels, you can expect to be able to have 3 cameras or less. If you're using a 5 gigahertz network with wider channels, then your camera capacity should go way up. If you're using a Mevo Hotspot and using cellular data for your uplink, then you can expect to get 3 to 5 cameras on a 5 gigahertz network. And if you have administrative access to your Wi-Fi network, then definitely tune it by scanning and choosing Wi-Fi channels that are not congested. And of course, test your configuration before going live. The performance of your system tested at home is going to be quite different than when you go out and do a live stream in a public area. There can be many more people and Wi-Fi devices and access points in a public area that's going to cause interference. And a disclaimer, of course, do your own research. There's always going to be some factors that can affect the performance of a Wi-Fi network. In your particular environment, you might find that a 2.4 gigahertz network works wonderful. I wish you the best in your live streams. If you've learned anything or found anything helpful from this video, leave a like, subscribe, whatever, and you can definitely leave a comment on any other kinds of videos that you might want to see.